Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here for ChessLecture.com, and today we're going to take a look at an instant classic, a game that became famous from the get-go and hopefully will be remembered for some time to come. So this was played in the Chinese Team Championship in November of 2017. White is a young grandmaster, I think he's 18, maybe 17 depending on when his birthday is, named Jinshi Bai. I might be messing that name up. And I apologize to those of you who know better and to the any Chinese players who are listening. And Black is the new, well, I was going to say the newly minted candidate, but he's, I suppose, not technically a candidate until the event happens. But at any rate, I'm referring to Liren, who qualified thanks to his fantastic result in the World Cup a couple of months ago. So he is, of course, the favorite in this game, and, well, he showed in this game why he was the favorite as well. So let's jump in. Ding has Black, and it's a Nimzo-Indian. We've got this flexible variation with Knight F3, or the Kasparov variation as it's sometimes called. And the idea is that depending on how Black responds, White has a number of different setups he can choose. So against C5, there's G3, and against D5, White might choose to go E3 if he wants, and play, go into a Rubinstein sort of variation. And then the third big option, or a third big option, is what we have in the game, and that's Black castling. And the point now is that White gets bishop to G5 in, hoping that this pin will prove slightly irritating now that Black is castled. If Black isn't castled, this kind of pin is often met by H6 and then G5, but here, of course, this is much less appealing for Black. So Black played C5. White went E3, takes. And now the standard move, played almost universally, is E takes D4. And the main move now for Black is D5. But H6 is also getting some play with the interesting variation Bishop to H4, Queen A5. And now, instead of Queen to C2, which is the most common move, there is this interesting gambit line with Bishop to D3 that you might want to check out. So takes, Queen C3, King F1, Knight H5, and then G3, stopping any Knight to F4 jumps. And White has compensation. I mean, has decent compensation for the pawn. So this is something to maybe consider if you're an aficionado of this variation. At any rate, this is not what happened in the game. Rather than the standard ED4, White played Queen takes D4. So there's some other examples of E takes D4, especially with D5 in the PGN. But let's focus on this, as this is the move played in the game. Okay, Black started off with the obvious move, Knight to C6. No real reason not to. And there aren't a lot of games to have reached this position, very few in fact. One of the earlier games saw White play Queen to H4, which frankly looks like the more obvious move, exerting further pressure on the knight on F6, and maybe White can have some dreams of playing Bishop to D3 with the idea of taking and giving mate on H7. And if Black plays H6, he's at least got to worry a bit about Bishop takes H6 possibilities. So, in fact, Black played H6 right away before the White Bishop could come to D3. And Bishop H6 doesn't seem to work. In the game, it was just a double exchange. And in this position, it's about equal. The game only went for another 120 moves, so we'll stop here. You can look at it on your own time. But Black is fine. This kind of structure is often really not terribly worrisome for Black, especially since White has no minor pieces that are really going to cause any trouble to his king side. So these doubled f-pawns and the isolated h-pawn really don't pose much of a problem, if any, for Black. So Queen to H4 then, it has an obvious strength to it, but the maybe slightly hidden drawback is that when Black plays H6, White can't play Bishop to H4 to maintain the pin. So for that reason, I presume, Bai played Queen to D3. And Black played H6, Bishop H4, D5. All right, makes sense for him to do this while he can. Certainly if Black waits until White has gotten his king off of the E1 and his castle, then it's going to be much more difficult to do it because the knight on C3 will be fighting against the D5 pawn break. Also, a rook coming to D1 would likewise fight against that break. So if it's not now or never, it's now or later with an awful lot of work happening first. So D5 was played. And white played rook to d1, stepping up the pressure on d5. And maybe black could consider taking, but here Liren goes for a very aggressive setup. As I said, g5 is not uncommon in positions where black has not castled the kingside, but after the castling has taken place, then while it's still certainly possible, I mean, it's not unknown, it obviously does entail quite a lot more risk. So g5 was played, bishop to g3, knight e4, which is more or less the point of playing g5, and now knight to d2. Okay, so here black still has options. He hasn't burned all of his bridges yet. In the game he plays knight to c5, which is certainly fine, but it is quite committal. The safer way to go was queen to a5, and it looks like this can just level out to a fairly comfortable draw for both sides. Knight c to e4, de, queen e4, rook to d8. Looks exciting, but it's not going to get very far. Queen to c2, rook takes d2, or you could play queen takes a2 first. It doesn't make a huge difference. So takes, queen a2, bishop to d3, queen a1, queen b1, queen a5, queen c2. And black could trade twice on d2, and that would be equal, but no real rush. You can play e5 first. White pretty much has to play king to e2 here. And now the double exchange, or actually just the single exchange. Double exchange is fine too, but let's say queen to c5. And this is an interesting position. Material is equal. Both sides have, let's say, problems to solve as far as their king's positions are concerned. So white's king, well, he'd certainly rather have his king tucked in on the king side, but first we got to get the rook out of the way. And as for black, when his king's on g7, it's going to be reasonably safe. Well, even on the g8 is fine. The only thing that white can do to try to bother him is to play h4, and that's worth considering. The response would probably be g4 to keep the file closed. So that's interesting over there. White also has the bishop pair, but black has a little bit more space. His queen on c5 and knight on c6 looks very good. Bishop will come to e6. The rook comes to c8 or d8. Maybe black will play a5 at some point to make sure that b4 never happens. And as I said, it's roughly equal. I mean, both sides will have plenty of chances to outplay their opponents. I think I would rather have black here, but certainly more bad things can happen to black's king than to white. So that's the one drawback. If white can find some way of blowing the position open, then he can have some serious chances. Also, it's the kind of position where if black makes a mistake, he can just lose. White making a mistake will just lead to a slightly worse position. Anyway, this didn't happen, but this is very much a realistic option for black and something to consider if you play this line in general, but don't want to take the chances that are involved in following in Liren's footsteps. So after knight to d2, as I said, black played knight to c5. White played queen to c2. And again, black needn't yet burn all of his bridges. So one thing you could do to be safe is to go bishop back to a5, running out of the way before a3 and b4 happens. White could play knight to b3, and you have a trade, and then black plays f5. And still a very interesting and complicated position, but as I said, one where black has not burned all of his bridges. Positional play is still relevant. Material is equal. The game goes on. Instead of this, he went for a much sharper approach with d4. Now, black would be very happy if white took on d4. I mean, then the knight recaptures and his pieces are swarming. But the key question is, what does he do after knight to f3? Well, as I said, he's all in now. So he goes e5. And here, white can and should take on e5. I mean, if you don't take on e5, black plays queen to e7, getting out of the way of the pin on the d4 pawn and protecting the e5 pawn a bit further. So something like that, or maybe queen f6, will leave black in not only in good stead, but with a safe position without really anything serious to worry about. So white's got to take on e5 to give black something to sweat about. In the game he took with the knight, let's see what happens if he plays bishop takes e5 instead. So takes, and now queen f6, breaking the pin, ed4, and white's up 2 pawns. And you give him a move or two, even just let him play bishop to e2. Let's say you retreat the knight, maybe bishop to e2, and black's in trouble. I mean, it's not clear that he's really got adequate compensation for the sacrificed pawns. He can get one back right away with knight takes d4, but it's 2 pawns, not 1. So he plays instead, or should play here instead, bishop to f5. So he should, of course, get the free move in. Comes without any cost. Here, white can play either queen to d2 or queen to c1. They come to the same thing, so it doesn't really matter. Let's say queen c1, rook a to d8. So bishop to e2, getting ready to castle, knight e6. So now if you castle, then knight takes d4 is kind of annoying because you're not only hitting the knight on e5. Let me show you. So here, right, it's not just that we're hitting the knight, but we're also threatening to play bishop c3 followed by knight e2 check with a royal fork. So this is not particularly satisfactory for white, and therefore, instead of castling, you should play queen to e3. So after queen to e3, then the next step is for black to play rook f to e8. White had better leave town with his king, and now knight takes d4. And takes d4, rook takes d4. White has this nice move, knight to g4, and this keeps him alive. After this, the game should be equal. For instance, bishop takes g4, queen e8 check, king g7, queen back to e3, bishop takes e2, knight e2, and rook c4. And after all of those adventures, the game winds up in a position with equal material. There's still some imbalances that make the game not just a trivial draw or anything, but objectively the position is equal. And the game can continue. All right, so bishop takes e5 does not offer white any advantage from here. And it's also, well, it's dangerous for both sides. I mean, white had to play carefully to avoid any catastrophes in the center, and then had to find that nice knight to g4 trick later on to prove equality, or to prove complete equality. At any rate, it was playable, and so was the move played in the game by white. He went knight takes e5, and now Liren shows his big idea, d takes c3. Even here, perhaps it's not strictly forced, but it is the whole point of black's play. I mean, this is what all of black's moves have been leading up to, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's a perfectly good move. So rook d8, cb2 check, and here white has to be precise. The right move here is rook to d2. And he's not really going to save the rook. That's not the issue. It's just, well, you'll see. I mean, it comes down to what happens along the way with black gaining his material. So rook to d8. Now, if white plays knight to f3, well, actually he's got 2 decent moves, knight f3 and bishop to d3. So on knight f3, we have to gang up some more, or we have to do some more work to grab this rook. So bishop to g4, piling on, and this b2 pawn is a problem. So queen takes b2, bishop takes f3, g takes f3, rook takes d2. There's no good square for the queen to go to, so he's got to give it back. And if you've been keeping track of the material, white's got an extra pawn here. And not only that, but he's got the 2 bishops. So you might think that this is, in fact, just terrific for white. And white is on his way to a glorious victory against one of the best players in the world. But in fact, it's not that simple. White's bishops are not really functioning very well in terms of positively doing something. So they're controlling some squares and preventing black from getting even more active than he already is. There's something to be said for that. But in terms of damage that they can do to black, there's really not much. White's queenside structure is a little bit bad. His kingside structure is compromised enough that it makes it difficult for him to really use his kingside majority in some kind of aggressive and in a way that's going to give him really serious winning chances. So it appears that black is doing just fine here. Okay, let's go back a little bit here. Okay, so that was knight to f3 from here. Instead, white could also try bishop to d3, blocking the d file and hoping to castle ASAP. But it's not so simple. So knight takes e5, And of course, if bishop takes e5, then there's knight takes d3, maybe even rook takes d3. So here, white should flick in this check first. Now king f8 is forced, so as not to allow bishop e5 to come with check. So bishop takes e5 anyway, rook takes d2, queen d2. Notice that black cannot queen because the bishop on h7 still controls the square. So takes, bishop e6, bishop e2, bishop c4. And this time material is equal. And on the other hand, white's structure is better, so it's not worse, but the position is just equal here in terms of the assessment. So rook to d2 appears to lead ultimately to equality. In the game, he played king to e2. Now, there are some positives to this move. I mean, it prevents him from getting his pieces all tied down, but there are drawbacks, of course. And an obvious drawback is that the bishop on f1 is now stuck, which means that the rook on h1 is not participating either. But what white felt was, okay, rook takes d8, queen b2, which is what happened, and he probably assumed that now black would have nothing better than to play rook to d2 check. They would just swap everything off. And, sorry, not king takes d2. That's a blunder because knight e4 check, followed by knight takes g3, removing the guard on the knight on e5. And white can't play knight takes c6 because then knight h1. Actually, even knight takes f1 with check. Well, depending on where white's king is, I guess it's not going to be on d2. So anyway, let me just show a variation instead of continuing to discuss this. Just knight takes h1. And even if the knight on h1 is eventually lost, black will still wind up with an extra exchange and should win the game. So, not that, but rather than king takes d2, of course, you throw in knight takes c6 first, and also, you know, this knight's ready to come to e7 and take on c8. So after this, and bc and king to d2, now white is up a good extra pawn. So his kingside structure is not compromised. He's got the two bishops, and if black plays knight to e4 and knight takes g3, well, no more two bishops, but it's same colored bishops in the ending. It's not opposite colored bishops, and white's extra pawn is good. So white has really good chances here. He's much better. So this, as I said, is probably what Jinshi Bai had expected to happen when he played king to e2 back here. But what he missed is the following. So knight to a4 first of all. Okay, this I'm sure he saw. Queen to c2, knight c3 check, king f3. And I'm sure he saw that g4, well, that's covered. The knight's got it. If knight e5, bishop e5, then g4, well, again, no problem. The king goes to g3. If you play h5, okay, it looks scary, threatening g4, but just h3 keeps everything covered as well. So it looks as if white is okay. He's ready to bring the bishop out, or maybe trade on c6, you know, something like this. Get the rook into play somewhere, I'm not sure where, maybe c1, or maybe go h4, and, you know, try bit by bit to untangle and make the material count. But what he missed, let me get rid of all the arrows there. What he missed was a really fantastic move, which also could have been played if he started with h5 and h3 first. So the move is this. So this is an amazing move, rook to d4. So what's the idea? Well, the idea is quite simple, mate in 2. g4 check, knight g4, bishop g4 mate. And the obvious tactical justification is that if e takes d4, well, knight takes d4 and knight takes c2. So, you know, it's not hard to calculate how it works once you get here, although, as we'll see, there's still plenty more to be done. I mean, it's not trivial yet. But it's easy to see that rook to d4 is a strong move and that it's justified. But, again, first you have to see it. I mean, for it to enter your mind in the first place is really tough. And, again, it's very likely that Ding Liren had seen this move quite a ways back. I mean, otherwise, well, otherwise none of this stuff works. So from, you know, as far as objectively speaking, when he played d takes c3 back here, so let's go back to this position. I mean, already here is getting late, but for sure, d takes c3 should not be played unless he's seen rook to d4 and has a pretty good idea that this is working. In fact, it's not only working, but it seems that black is winning already, that king to e2 by white rather than just giving back the material with rook to d2. Now that he's played king to e2, it's losing. Okay, so white played h3, black played h5, renewing the threat of g4, hg, knight g4, and then bishop takes g4, checkmate. And again, of course, e takes d4 makes no more sense than it did last move. One alternative, though, to what he played. So he played bishop to h2, giving his king the g3 square. Another try is e4, but this gets busted like this. Rook takes e4, renewing the threat, queen e4, knight e4, king e4, and materially, white is not in terrible shape. In fact, material is equal, but black goes f5, and then plays f4, burying the bishop on h2, and although material is equal, white's king is in the open air, and the rest of his pieces, well, not the rest, not all of them, but the bishop on h2 and the rook on h1 are completely out of the game, and so black is simply winning there. So that would not have been an adequate solution. Instead, he played bishop to h2, as I said, now g4 check, and king to g3. And knight e4 check doesn't seem to get anywhere. So what does black do now? Well, it's another beautiful move, and it's an echo of the earlier move. He goes rook to d2. So beautiful move, and it's not just a cheapo, of course. If queen takes d2, then knight to e4, followed by knight takes queen, leaves black a piece ahead here. But there's a further point to this. So after rook to d2, white plays queen to b3. Now knight to e4 check, and well, big trouble. If you go king f4, well, this is not going to save the day, because king f4, of course, you play rook takes f2. And if you go here, then let's see if we can find the mate. I believe I found it. Yeah, just f5 check. If you go king to d3, then rook to d2 is mate. And if you go king to d5, then I think just knight e7. Oh, no, that's not mate. What am I missing here? So instead of that, how do we give mate? Yeah, instead of f5 check, sorry. Let's go bishop to f5 check. So king d5 and then rook to d8. Okay, so that's actually pretty simple. White can throw the knight away, and then white can throw the bishop away, but there's no getting out. So that is the end of that little attempt. Okay, instead of this, white played king to h4, and it's again not immediately evident that black can win. I mean, it feels like white has some freedom here. He's threatening to take on h5, maybe to play hg. It just, it doesn't look like he's completely cornered. Like, at least there seems as if there could be some hope. But as we'll see, there really isn't. So Liren plays bishop to e7 check. Okay, only move, king takes h5. And now, while there is more than one way to finish the job, he does it in an elegant way. He goes king to g7, and it's clear what he's up to with this move. He wants to move the bishop and then play rook to h8, mate. And also the king on g7 takes the h6 square away from white's king, so it's one less square he can run off to. Okay, so what does white do now? Well, he goes bishop to f4, hoping with bishop to h6 check, before the rook, of course, gets to h8, to buy some more time, to have a little bit of a chance. Well, he does play bishop to f5. Rook takes f2 is also winning, but this is good. White played bishop to h6 check. Black plays king to h7. And now what? So it looks like white has made some progress here. But it's just, the king is just stuck too badly. Plays queen takes b7. And under normal circumstances, this would be just some kind of crushing move, hitting the rook, undermining the knight. If the knight moves, then queen takes e7 is possible. And if the queen's on e7, then black's king might start to have something to worry about. But he's too late. White, I don't know if he missed it or if he just, there wasn't really much he felt that he could do. But he runs into rook takes f2. And the point of this is that, yes, you can take this rook, but knight to g3 is mate. Amazing, amazing game. So instead of queen takes a8, white played bishop to g5, which stops that mate, but now again the h-file is once again open for business. Black goes rook to h8 and just threatens to move the king over and give mate in a couple of moves here. King g7, bishop h6, rook h6, splat. Well, what is white? What can white do now? He goes knight f7. Makes sense. Maybe in some variations, the g6 square could come available to the king. But more importantly, or more directly, of course, the point is that he threatens to play knight h8. So king of g7 is no problem because knight takes h8 gets rid of the checker. Also, now this bishop on e7 is pinned and it's under attack. So we would play bishop takes e7 next. Well, of course, that's not what Liren did, but got to find something else to do. And here's what he comes up with. Bishop to g6 check. Okay, only legal move is king takes g4. And now, just a gorgeous way to finish the game, knight to e5 check. And unfortunately, white resigned. When you lose a game this brilliant, you really should just play till mate. Your opponent has earned the right to give mate, I think. So, and I hope that if this happens in a game of mine, I'll follow my own suggestion here. And often a lot of top players, I mean, I've seen some top players who lose brilliant games like this. A lot of them will allow them mate. Some won't. Like Anand will never allow them mate. Others, I think so, and I've seen a couple other people will do it. Anyway, it's a matter of taste. But this, again, is just such a beautiful game that it's a pity he didn't play till mate but resigned here. Anyway, here are the options for white. If he goes king to h4, then king to g8, knight takes h8. Notice you got to go to g8 because if it was on g7, the bishop on e7 would be pinned. But instead, of course, this is mate. So it's just a beautiful pattern. It's just too bad there's no way to sacrifice the rook first to make this happen. But you've got it's a very pretty pattern with the knights side by side and the bishops side by side as well. That is what would happen if he played king to h4 here. And if he plays knight takes e5, the game lasts a move longer, but it's a little less aesthetically pleasing. Bishop f5 check, king h5, or king h4 is the same thing. Well, actually, king h4 would be moved faster because this would have been mate in that case. But here he gets to make the spite interposition, spite check, bishop h6, but this is mate. So fantastic game by Liren, really, really beautiful. And if he can get games like this going on as the candidates, great things will happen to him. But he will be playing players who are stronger than Bai Jinshi. Nevertheless, a really beautiful game, one that I'm sure will be shown for many years to come, and rightly so. So, hope you guys enjoyed this. Until next time, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos signing off for ChessLecture.com. Bye-bye.